The police laughed at him, mocked him, and treated him like dirt just because he was young, black, and walking home alone. But their laughter froze when they discovered the truth that the boy's father wasn't just anybody, he was the director of the FBI. The evening sky glowed with streaks of orange and pink as Marcus strolled down the cracked sidewalk, dribbling his basketball softly against the pavement. He had just finished a long day of school followed by basketball practice, and though his legs were tired, there was a proud bounce in his step. His team had won their scrimmage, and he had made the winning shot. The joy of that moment still lingered in his chest, and he hummed quietly, the rhythm of the ball echoing with each bounce. His backpack, stuffed with sweaty clothes and a half-eaten sandwich, swung from one shoulder, making him look like any other teenager heading home. The neighborhood was quiet, with the occasional dog barking behind a fence or a car passing by slowly. Marcus enjoyed these walks home. They gave him time to think about his dreams of playing college basketball, about his classes, and sometimes about his father, who worked long hours but always reminded Marcus that discipline and self-respect mattered more than anything else. Tonight, Marcus felt especially proud, replaying the sound of his teammates cheering for him when he had sunk the last basket. But as he walked further down the street, a strange heaviness crept in. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, casting long shadows across the ground. He noticed a police car parked a few blocks away. Its engine idled, headlights glowing faintly. Marcus thought nothing of it at first. He had seen police cars plenty of times before. Still, he tugged his hoodie a little tighter around his shoulders, hoping to get home quickly before his mom worried. The sound of the basketball stopped when he tucked it under his arm. The air felt heavier now, as though the world was watching him. His footsteps echoed in the silence, and though he tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, the low rumble of the police car's engine didn't go away. Marcus's heart beat a little faster, and though he didn't yet know why, he sensed that this walk home would not be. Marcus was only a few steps from turning onto his street when the sudden wail of a police siren split the quiet evening. His body jolted, and for a second, he froze in place. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the nearby houses, bouncing across windows like restless ghosts. The police car that had been idling down the block now rolled forward slowly until it crept up right beside him. The siren died down, but the car didn't move on. Instead, the passenger side window rolled down with a squeak. "Hey, kid! What are you doing out here?" one officer barked. His voice was sharp, cutting into the calmness of Marcus's walk. Marcus tightened his grip on the basketball under his arm and blinked in confusion. He had never been spoken to like that by strangers, much less by men in uniform. "I'm just heading home, sir," Marcus replied softly, trying to sound respectful. His father's words echoed in his head, "Always stay calm. Always stay polite." But his chest felt tight, and his palms began to sweat. The officer in the passenger seat leaned out further, eyes narrowing. "This late? With that bag? You look like you've been up to something. You sure you're not carrying anything you shouldn't?" His tone dripped with suspicion, as if Marcus's very existence was evidence of guilt. Marcus shook his head quickly. "No, sir. Just my school stuff and my basketball clothes." He shifted his weight nervously, wishing the car would just drive away. But instead, the second officer, the driver, chuckled and said, "Yeah, right. They all say that." Before Marcus could respond, the car door swung open. One of the officers stepped out, boots crunching against the gravel. He circled Marcus slowly, as though inspecting him under a spotlight. Neighbors' curtains twitched as curious eyes peeked through windows. The quiet block no longer felt safe. Marcus swallowed hard. His heart thudded in his chest, the joy of his earlier basketball victory now gone. He had done nothing wrong, but Marcus stood still, clutching his basketball tighter against his side as the officer circled him. The other leaned against the patrol car, arms crossed, a smirk stretched across his face. "What's in the bag, huh?" the first officer asked, tugging Marcus's backpack off his shoulder before he could even answer. The zipper was pulled open roughly, and clothes spilled onto the ground. A pair of sneakers tumbled onto the sidewalk, followed by a rolled-up math notebook. The officer snorted. Basketball shoes and homework. That's your big cover story? The second officer laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. He's probably hiding something else. They always do. His tone was cruel, as though Marcus's very presence was a joke to them. Marcus's throat tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He bent down to pick up his belongings, but the officer's boot pressed down lightly on his notebook, pinning it to the concrete. Not so fast, he sneered. I told you, it's just school stuff, Marcus said softly, his voice trembling despite his effort to be steady. The laughter that followed stung worse than any shove. They weren't listening, they weren't even trying to. The crowd was beginning to grow. A few neighbors had stepped out onto their porches, and two teenagers across the street pulled out their phones, recording the scene. But instead of embarrassment, the officers seemed amused by the attention. Look at him, the driver said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Acting all innocent. Probably thinks he's smarter than us. Marcus felt his face burn, not from guilt but from humiliation. He wanted to shout that he wasn't guilty of anything, that he was just a kid walking home. But he bit his tongue, remembering his father's warning that anger could turn a bad situation into something worse. Still, the laughter pierced him deeply. To them, he wasn't a boy who loved basketball or a student who worked hard in school, he was just a target for their ridicule. As the officers. The mocking wasn't enough for the officers. Their smirks grew sharper, and soon their tone turned from teasing to intimidation. One of them suddenly shoved Marcus against the hood of the patrol car, the cold metal pressing hard against his chest. His basketball slipped from his arm, rolling helplessly into the street, where it bounced twice before settling in the gutter. Marcus gasped from the sudden push, his hands instinctively rising. I didn't do anything, he pleaded, his voice trembling. The officer closest to him gave a dry laugh. You kids always say that. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. He patted Marcus down roughly, his hands slapping against his hoodie pockets as though expecting to pull out weapons or drugs. Of course, there was nothing, only lint and a crumpled candy wrapper. Still, the officer acted as if Marcus's empty pockets were a trick. The second officer picked up Marcus's backpack and turned it upside down completely, shaking it until his socks, t-shirt, and even his water bottle clattered onto the sidewalk. The water spilled across the concrete, spreading into a dark puddle. Well, the officer sneered, looks like we've got ourselves a real dangerous criminal, armed with algebra homework and sneakers. The two laughed together, the sound echoing through the quiet street like a cruel performance. Marcus stood frozen, shame and anger battling inside him. He could feel the sting of tears building, but he refused to let them fall. If he cried, they would win. If he fought, they would twist it against him. So he stood tall, trying to remember his father's steady voice, never let anyone break your spirit, no matter how hard they try. The neighbors watching from their porches began whispering to each other. The teenagers filming zoomed in on Marcus's pale face and the officer's rough hands. The whole block could see the injustice, yet the officers carried on as if their actions were a game. In that moment, Marcus. The sound of Marcus's water bottle clattering onto the pavement seemed to echo louder than it should have. It was as if the noise had summoned more eyes to the scene. Curtains shifted in nearby windows, blinds tilted, and neighbors leaned forward to see what was happening. A woman watering her flowers on her porch froze, her hand tightening on the hose as water spilled over her shoes. The block, once calm and quiet, now buzzed with unease. Two teenagers across the street kept their phones raised, recording every second. The red glow of the police cars' lights washed over them, flickering across their faces as they exchanged shocked glances. One whispered, "They're going too far," but neither dared to speak louder. The woman on her porch finally called out, "He's just a boy. Leave him alone." Her voice trembled, but it carried enough strength to make the officers glance her way. Instead of backing down, one of them smirked. "Ma'am, stay out of this. We're just doing our job." His words were meant to sound professional, but the way he shoved Marcus harder against the car betrayed the truth. It wasn't Judy driving them, it was arrogance. Marcus's face burned with humiliation as he felt dozens of eyes on him. The officer's laughter seemed even crueler now, echoing in front of an audience. He wanted to explain, to tell everyone watching that he was innocent, that he was just trying to walk home. But his throat locked up, and no words came out. Phones continued to record. More neighbors trickled out onto porches and sidewalks. A man carrying groceries stopped mid-step, staring in disbelief as Marcus's backpack lay emptied across the pavement. Whispers grew into murmurs, and murmurs grew into a quiet but undeniable anger that spread through the crowd. The officers, however, acted as though the onlookers didn't matter. They mocked Marcus louder, making a show out of their control. But what they didn't realize was that every laugh, every shove, and every careless word Marcus's chest pressed against the cold hood of the patrol car, but inside him burned a quiet fire. His father's voice echoed in his memory like a shield. Strength isn't always in your fists, son. Sometimes, it's in your silence. Sometimes, it's in your eyes. Those words, spoken countless times at the dinner table and during late-night talks, grounded him now. He straightened his back as much as the officer's hand allowed, refusing to slump in defeat. His breathing steadied, slow and controlled, even though fear pressed heavy in his stomach. When the officer leaned down and muttered, "Think you're tough, huh?" Marcus didn't flinch. He simply looked ahead, his gaze fixed on the glowing streetlight at the corner, as though the light itself was his anchor. The crowd noticed. The same neighbors who had winced when Marcus was shoved now saw something different. They saw a boy who, despite the humiliation, wasn't breaking. The woman with the garden hose whispered, "He's holding himself strong." The teenagers recording nodded, their cameras steady, capturing not just the cruelty but the quiet resilience that pushed back against it. Marcus refused to cry. The sting in his eyes begged for release, but he locked it away. He would not give the officers that satisfaction. They wanted to see him crumble, to hear him beg or lash out so they could twist the story. Instead, Marcus stood like stone, silent but unyielding. His basketball still lay forgotten in the gutter, its orange surface dim under the streetlight, but Marcus's strength wasn't in the ball or the game tonight, it was in his spirit. And though the officers tried to strip away his dignity with every shove and sneer, they could not touch the pride his father had built in him. The crowd felt it too. Whispers turned into firm voices. "He's just a kid," one man shouted. "This isn't right." The tension shifted, the balance of power beginning to tilt. For the first time, the officers' laughter faltered. Marcus hadn't. The officers, sensing the crowd's growing unrest, decided to push harder, as if to reassert control. One of them snatched Marcus's phone from the pile of belongings scattered on the ground. He held it up for the crowd to see, smirking. "Let's see what our little troublemaker has been hiding in here," he said mockingly, pressing the power button. The screen lit up with Marcus's wallpaper, a picture of him and his father smiling at a basketball game. The officer chuckled. "Cute. Dad is proud of you, huh?" Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't reply. He simply watched, heart pounding, as the officer swiped through the phone. The crowd murmured louder, their disapproval growing, but no one dared step forward. The officer scrolled to Marcus's contacts, muttering under his breath. Then his finger froze. His mocking grin slowly faded as he squinted at the name on the screen, "Dad, FBI Director." For a long second, the world seemed to stop. The officer blinked, his hand trembling slightly as he read it again, as though trying to convince himself it wasn't real. His partner noticed the change in his face. "What's wrong?" "Found his gang buddies," he asked sarcastically, stepping closer. The officer turned the screen toward him. The partner's smirk evaporated instantly. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. "Did he say FBI?" one woman gasped. "FBI Director," another echoed. The teenagers' recording zoomed in, their phones capturing every reaction. Marcus stayed silent, his father's advice echoing once more, "The truth doesn't need you to shout, it speaks for itself. He stood straighter, his eyes locking on the officers as if daring them to continue. The officers exchanged nervous glances, their confidence crumbling. The weight of their actions began to press down on them. What had started as a game of mockery was now spiraling into something much bigger, something they could no longer laugh off. For the first time that night, Marcus felt the balance shift. He had. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. The two officers, who had been laughing only moments ago, now looked like they had swallowed stones. The name glowing on the phone screen, that FBI director, had stripped the smugness from their faces. Their eyes darted nervously between each other, then back at Marcus, as if hoping this was some elaborate joke. But Marcus didn't move, didn't speak. He simply met their stares with calm, steady eyes. The officer still holding the phone whispered under his breath, "No way, this can't be real." His fingers trembled slightly as if the device itself had grown heavier. His partner leaned in again, his voice cracking with disbelief. "You're telling me this kid's father is him? The director of the FBI?" The words, though hushed, carried across the crowd, and a ripple of shock swept through the neighbors watching. Murmurs rose quickly. "That's the FBI director's son," someone gasped. "Oh, they're in big trouble now," another added. Phones clicked and buzzed as more people began recording, some already typing messages to friends and family about what they were witnessing. The officers, once in control, now looked like animals trapped in a cage with nowhere to run. The driver cleared his throat, forcing a shaky laugh. "Look, kid, we didn't mean any harm. Just a standard procedure." His voice betrayed his fear, and the crowd wasn't buying it. The woman on the porch crossed her arms, her eyes sharp. "Standard procedure?" Pushing a child against a car and dumping his things on the street, she challenged. Marcus didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence, paired with the truth revealed on the phone, spoke louder than anything. The same quiet strength that had carried him through their mockery now seemed unshakable, almost intimidating. The officer's confidence was gone. Their laughter had turned into stammering excuses, their arrogance replaced by the sick realization of what they had done. They hadn't just hummed. The officer's nervous whispers only fueled the tension hanging in the air. The crowd, now larger than before, leaned in closer, their phones raised high like glowing torches in the night. Every second felt heavier than the last. The officer holding Marcus's phone finally lowered it, his face pale, his jaw clenched tight. "It says his father is the FBI director," he muttered, his voice too weak to mask the fear. The words rippled through the crowd, sending gasps and murmurs rolling like waves down the street. The driver, suddenly aware of the dozens of watchful eyes, straightened his uniform as though the act alone could restore his authority. But his attempt at control was hollow. His smirk was gone, replaced by a twitch in his lip he couldn't hide. "Kid," he stammered, "why didn't you just tell us who your dad was?" It was a weak attempt to shift the blame, as though Marcus had tricked them into humiliating themselves. Marcus, still pressed lightly against the patrol car, finally turned his head. He didn't raise his voice, didn't even sound angry. "I shouldn't have to," he said simply. His words, quiet but steady, struck harder than any shout could have. The crowd erupted with agreement, murmurs of "exactly" and "that's right" rising from every corner. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, their once smug partnership unraveling in the face of truth. They knew now that this wasn't just about roughing up a teenager, it was about to become a headline, an investigation, maybe even the end of their careers. And worse, the boy's father wasn't just any powerful man, he was the one man who could hold them accountable at the highest level. The weight of their mistake pressed down on them like a stone. Sweat beaded on their foreheads despite the cool night air. The authority they had flaunted so carelessly had been stripped away in seconds, replaced by dread. For Marcus, the moment was a strange mix of justice and restraint. He had not shouted, fought, or begged, yet the officers were unraveling. Their earlier arrogance had vanished, replaced with desperate attempts to salvage their authority. The one holding Marcus's phone quickly shoved it back into the boy's hands, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Here you go, son," he said awkwardly, as though he hadn't just rifled through it moments ago. He bent down, scooping up Marcus's spilled belongings from the pavement, brushing dust off the math notebook before shoving it clumsily into the backpack. His partner grabbed the water bottle from the ground and tried to hand it back with a grin that shook at the corners. "Sorry about the mess," the driver muttered, his tone suddenly polite. "Just a routine check, you understand. Nothing personal." But the crowd didn't buy it. Dozens of eyes stared back at him, skeptical and unforgiving. The woman on the porch spoke again, her voice sharp and clear. "Routine check. You pushed that boy against a car like he was a criminal. We all saw it." The officer's smiles faltered. They shifted uncomfortably, realizing that their words were meaningless against the truth caught on so many phones. The officer who had mocked Marcus earlier now tried a different tactic, patting Marcus lightly on the shoulder as if they were friends. "You're a good kid," he said, his voice strained. "No hard feelings, right? Let's just move past this." But Marcus didn't answer. He stood tall, holding his basketball tightly once more, his silence louder than any reply. His refusal to play along with their cover-up only deepened their panic. The murmurs in the crowd swelled. "They're scared now," someone whispered. "They know they messed up." The officers exchanged quick glances, their faces tight with worry. They wanted this moment erased, buried before it reached the wrong ears. But they knew the damage was done. Too many witnesses. Too many cameras. Their authority had already slipped through their fingers. What remained was only fear, fear of the boy they had. Just when the tension seemed unbearable, the deep rumble of an engine echoed down the street. A sleek black SUV turned the corner, its headlights cutting through the uneasy silence. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The SUV rolled to a stop beside the patrol car, and for a moment, no one moved. Then the back door swung open, and a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped out. His polished shoes clicked against the pavement, his presence commanding immediate attention. Marcus's heart leapt, he knew that stride anywhere. His father. The officers froze, their faces draining of color as recognition hit them. The man who stood before them was not just any parent rushing to his child's side. He was the director of the FBI, a figure whose authority stretched far beyond the flashing lights of a patrol car. His sharp eyes swept over the scene, taking in the scattered belongings, the uneasy crowd, and finally, his son standing proud despite the humiliation. "Marcus," he said, his voice calm yet firm, "are you all right?" "Yes, Dad," Marcus replied softly, relief washing over him, though he still stood tall, unwilling to show weakness. The FBI director turned then, slowly, deliberately, to the two officers. His gaze was like a blade, cold, steady, and impossible to escape. The man who had mocked and shoved Marcus only minutes ago now looked like schoolboys caught in the middle of a lie. One cleared his throat, attempting a weak smile. "Sir, we were just..." "Just what?" Marcus's father interrupted, his tone measured but heavy with authority. "Just harassing a child. Just abusing your badge in front of an entire neighborhood." His words cut through the air like thunder, silencing not only the officers but the entire crowd. Phones were raised higher now, recording every second. The neighbors watched with wide eyes, their earlier whispers replaced by a deep, expectant silence. For the first time, Marcus saw the same men. The street was so quiet that even the chirping of crickets seemed to have stopped. The FBI director stood still for a moment, his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp gaze locked on the two officers who had dared to lay hands on his son. He didn't raise his voice, but there was a weight in his tone that made every word land like a hammer. "Explain yourselves," he demanded, his voice calm but laced with steel. The driver stammered first. "Yes, sir, we were conducting a standard patrol." The boy looked suspicious. "We only stopped him to make sure everything was okay." His words trembled, and his attempt at professionalism cracked under the pressure of that piercing gaze. Marcus's father took a single step forward, and the crowd instinctively leaned closer, holding their breath. Suspicious, he repeated, his voice low. He pointed at Marcus's belongings scattered on the ground, his notebook, his shoes, his spilled water bottle. This is what you call evidence of a threat. A child carrying homework and sneakers. His words sliced through the air, sharp and undeniable. The second officer opened his mouth to speak, but the FBI director cut him off with a raised hand. Don't waste my time with excuses. I saw the fear in your faces when you realized who he is. You didn't stop him because of his actions, you stopped him because of what he looks like. Isn't that right? His voice hardened, and the weight of truth made both men lower their eyes in shame. The neighbors nodded, murmuring in agreement. The woman from the porch shouted, "That's exactly what happened," and the crowd's voices swelled with support. Phones continued to record, capturing every word of the director's measured fury. Marcus's father looked at the officers one final time, his voice calm but chilling. Your badge is meant to protect, not to humiliate. You have disgraced your oath tonight. And make no mistake, this will not be ignored. The officers stood frozen, stripped of their arrogance, drowning UND. The crowd, now fully gathered on porches and sidewalks, leaned in as the FBI director shifted his attention from the trembling officers to the people who had witnessed everything. His eyes swept across the street, sharp but steady, meeting the gaze of neighbors who still clutched their phones tightly. Keep recording, he said firmly, his voice carrying over the quiet block. The truth must be seen. His words weren't a request, they were a command, and they filled the onlookers with a sense of duty. The woman with the garden hose lifted her chin, her phone already pointed at the officers. The two teenagers across the street, who had been filming from the start, exchanged a quick glance before nodding. One of them whispered, "We've got all of it," holding up his phone like proof of justice. The murmurs of the crowd grew stronger, a wave of support swelling for Marcus and his father. The officers looked around desperately, their earlier bravado completely gone. Sir, this doesn't need to go any further, the driver pleaded, his voice cracking under the weight of so many watching eyes. But the director's sharp gaze silenced him instantly. This goes exactly as far as it needs to, Marcus's father replied. Every shove, every insult, every abuse of power, it will all be documented. My son will not be just another name brushed aside in silence. He is not invisible. His words rang with authority, but also with something deeper, an unwavering determination to turn pain into justice. The crowd responded with nods, whispers of agreement, and even applause from a few. The neighbors who had once watched in fear now stood taller, emboldened by the presence of someone who would not let injustice disappear. The officers fidgeted nervously, sweat bleeding at their temples. They knew the evidence against them wasn't just in Marcus's father's hands, it was in the hands of an entire community. Their excuses could be silenced, but the recordings, the witnesses, and the truth co. The once confident officers now stood stiff and uneasy, their badges glinting under the harsh glow of the streetlights, but their authority was gone. The driver swallowed hard, his voice trembling as he tried to salvage what little dignity he had left. Sir, we went too far. We didn't mean any real harm, he stammered, glancing nervously at the crowd that surrounded them. His partner, no longer smirking, nodded quickly, his face pale. We apologize. To the boy. To you. To everyone here. It was a mistake. But their words sounded hollow, flimsy against the memory of their laughter and the sting of their cruelty. The neighbors weren't fooled. The woman on the porch shouted, "You're not sorry for what you did, you're sorry you got caught." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and the officers' faces flushed with shame. Marcus's father didn't blink. He stepped closer, his voice calm but unwavering, like steel wrapped in silk. You apologize now because you see who I am. But what if I were not the FBI director? Would you still be sorry? Or would my son be left humiliated, another child broken by your abuse of power? His words cut deep, not only into the officers but into the conscience of everyone listening. Marcus, standing tall beside his father, finally spoke. His voice was quiet but carried strength beyond his years. "You didn't see me as a person. You only saw what you wanted to see." The officers dropped their heads, unable to meet his steady gaze. The director turned to the crowd, his eyes sweeping over the witnesses. "This apology means nothing unless change follows. Remember this moment. Remember how quickly power can be abused, and how easily silence can protect it. Do not let silence win." His words were not just for the officers, but for the community itself. The officers muttered another week, "We're sorry," but no one clapped, no one nodded. Their apology was drowned beneath the truth, a truth that now belonged to the entire neighborhood. The night air felt different now, charged with a sense of awakening. What began as a cruel humiliation had turned into a lesson that no one on that street would ever forget. Marcus stood close to his father, his young eyes filled not with tears but with determination. He could see clearly now, power wasn't just about titles or badges. Real power was truth, and truth had finally been spoken. The FBI director placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder, his voice strong and deliberate as he addressed the crowd. "Remember this, justice is not reserved for those with powerful fathers or famous names. Every child deserves dignity, every person deserves respect. If we let fear and prejudice guide us, we destroy the very oath that binds us together as a society." His words echoed across the block, resonating with the quiet hearts of neighbors who had felt powerless before but now found courage rising within them. One by one, the neighbors lowered their phones, not to hide the truth but because they knew it was already safe, engraved in their minds and recorded in their devices. The woman on the porch wiped a tear from her eye. The teenagers who had filmed everything nodded proudly, whispering to each other about how the world needed to see this. The two officers stood hollow and small, stripped of arrogance, their silence louder than any apology. They had become the cautionary tale in a story larger than themselves. Marcus looked up at his father, finally asking the question that had been burning in his chest. "Dad, will things ever really change?" His father knelt to meet his son's eyes, his expression softening. "Change is never easy, Marcus. But it begins here, with voices that refuse to be silenced. Tonight, you stood strong. Tonight, a lesson was given, not just to them, but to everyone watching." As the crowd slowly dispersed, the boy and his father walked home side by side, their footsteps steady. What had started as a night of humiliation ended as a story of strength.